Betrayal leaves a deeper scar than any silver blade. When a blinded, ruthless king publicly cast aside his destined soulmate for being too weak, he sealed his own doom. He thought power would save his kingdom, until a haunting melody in the dark revealed the devastating truth of his colossal mistake. In the brutal winter of 1243, nestled within the jagged peaks of the Northumbrian mountains, Castle Ethelgard stood as an impenetrable fortress of stone and ice. Here ruled Garrick Wycliffe, the Alpha King of the Winterborn. Garrick was a legend, carved in Vance, a fearsome leader who had secured his kingdom's borders against a massive uprising of rogue packs, but victory had demanded a horrific price. During the savage Battle of Redbridge, a poisoned rogue claw had slashed across Garrick's face, taking his sight forever. Now the Alpha King ruled in absolute darkness, relying entirely on his heightened lichen senses of hearing, touch, and smell to govern his volatile court. Bitterness had hardened Garrick's heart. He felt vulnerable knowing that the rival lords of the surrounding territories, particularly the ambitious Duke Henry Cavendish, whispered that a blind king was a weak king. To solidify his reign, Garrick needed a Luna, a queen of undeniable strength, royal blood, and fierce presence. The night of the lunar ascendancy arrived, an ancient medieval rite where the moon goddess revealed destined mates. Hundreds of unmated females from noble houses across the continent gathered in the great hall. Among them was Lady Isolde Beaufort, a cunning and breathtakingly beautiful noblewoman from the southern Vales. Isolde had long coveted the Winterborn throne, and had spent months weaving a web of political alliances to ensure she would stand by Garrick's sidemate or not. But fate is a cruel weaver. Hiding in the shadows at the very back of the hall was Seraphina Locke. Seraphina was no noblewoman. She was the orphaned daughter of Arthur Locke, a disgraced former guardsman. To survive in the harsh lower village, Seraphina worked tirelessly in the local apothecary under the harsh tutelage of an old healer named Beatrice Cromwell. For weeks, Seraphina had been tending to a severe infection on her arm, applying pungent, bitter poultices of dried wolfsbane, yarrow, and camphor. The medicinal paste completely masked her natural sweet scent, replacing it with the acrid, stinging odor of sickness and harsh herbs. As the midnight hour struck, Garrick descended from his obsidian throne. He walked down the line of women, his blind eyes staring straight ahead, letting his wolf guide him. When he passed Isolde Beaufort, she practically threw her alluring scent of crushed roses and musk at him, but his wolf felt nothing. He kept walking, moving toward the very back of the hall, drawn by an invisible, undeniable tether pulling at his soul. He stopped directly in front of Seraphina. The great hall fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. Garrick reached out his large, scarred hand, brushing against Seraphina's trembling shoulder. The moment their skin made contact, a violent jolt of electricity sparked between them. Mate, his wolf growled in the darkness of his mind. But as Garrick stepped closer, his nose wrinkled in disgust. Instead of the intoxicating aroma of his destined Luna, he smelled the overwhelming, sickly stench of wolfsbane and medicinal decay. To a werewolf, wolfsbane was a scent associated with weakness, poison, and impending death. Before Garrick could speak, Isolde Beaufort stepped smoothly out of the crowd, seizing the moment. Leaning close to the blind king's ear, she whispered with feigned pity, "My king, the goddess jests. This is Seraphina Locke, a lowly apothecary's servant. She is sickly, covered in sores, and reeks of decay. She is a frail, broken thing. The lords will laugh us out of the Northumbrian territories if you crown a diseased peasant as our queen." Garrick's jaw clenched. His insecurity over his own blindness flared into a defensive rage. He could not afford to look weak. He needed a warrior, a wolf of royal pedigree to command respect, not a sickly commoner who smelled of death. The survival of his pack outweighed the whims of destiny. Taking a step back, Garrick addressed the silent watching court. His voice boomed cold and devoid of mercy. The moon goddess has made an error. A blind king cannot protect this realm with a crippled, diseased mate. Seraphina's heart shattered against her ribs. She looked up at the towering, scarred king, tears pooling in her eyes. "My king," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the crackling hearths. "I am not diseased. Please." "Silence!" Garrick snapped his tone, echoing like a whip. He stood tall, projecting his authority to every noble in the room. "I, Garrick Wycliffe Alpha, King of the Winterborn, reject you, Seraphina Locke, as my mate and Luna." The words struck with the force of a physical blow. The mystical bond, tethering their souls, violently snapped. Garrick flinched, clutching his chest as his wolf whimpered in agony, but he masked his pain behind a stoic, emotionless expression. Seraphina fell to her knees, coughing up a spatter of dark blood as the rejection tore through her spiritual core. The court watched in hushed horror, but Seraphina Locke was the daughter of a guardsman, and she had a spine of steel. Trembling, she pushed herself up from the cold stone floor. Wiping the blood from her chin, she looked at the blind king, who had chosen pride over his own soul. "I, Seraphina Locke," she said, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face, "accept your rejection, King Garrick. May your crown keep you warm in the dark." Without another word, she turned and fled the great hall, disappearing into the freezing, relentless blizzard of the Northumbrian night. 6 agonizing months passed since the night of the lunar ascendancy. The harsh winter had frozen Castle Ethelgard in a perpetual state of gloom. Garrick Wycliffe's reign had grown increasingly tyrannical and paranoid. Rejecting a chosen mate was a violation of natural law, and the consequences were destroying him from the inside out. Garrick suffered from crippling insomnia. Phantom pains ripped through his chest every night, leaving him gasping for air in the darkness of his royal chambers. His inner wolf had fallen into a deep, unreachable depression, refusing to speak to him or lend him its strength. He was growing physically weaker, his once imposing muscles deteriorating. Dr. Edwin Carmichael, the royal physician, was summoned repeatedly, but medicine could not cure a dying soul. "It is an affliction of the spirit, my king," Dr. Carmichael had warned him privately. "A severed bond leaves a wound that bleeds invisibly. If you do not find her, your wolf will die, and it will take you with it." But Garrick refused to show weakness. Meanwhile, Lady Isolde Beaufort had seamlessly positioned herself as his primary confidant and advisor. She controlled the flow of information to the blind king, convincing him that the pack was thriving under her guidance. She had successfully manipulated Garrick into agreeing to a political union. The royal wedding was set to take place during the impending winter solstice festival, cementing Isolde as his chosen queen. Unknown to Garrick, Seraphina had not perished in the blizzard. She had sought refuge in Oakhaven, a grim, heavily forested outer village populated by outcasts and disgraced wolves. She had survived the winter under the care of an elderly lumberjack named Thomas and his wife Martha. Stripped of her mate, bond, Seraphina's wolf had gone dormant, but something else within her had awakened. Generations ago, the Lycan ancestors possessed a rare gift, known as the Aurea of the Moon, a vocal resonance capable of soothing feral beasts, healing emotional trauma, and speaking directly to a wolf's spirit. It was a trait believed to be entirely extinct, but trauma and rejection had unlocked it within Seraphina. When she sang to the sick children in Oakhaven, their fevers broke, When she hummed to the injured hunting dogs, their wounds knitted faster. The winter solstice arrived. By tradition, the heavy iron gates of Castle Ethelgard were opened, allowing the commoners from the outer villages into the lower courtyard for a night of feasting, drinking, and remembrance of the dead. Garrick stood on the high stone balcony overlooking the courtyard wrapped in heavy furs. He was miserable. Beside him, Isolde wore a crown of winter jewels, beaming at the crowds, playing the part of the benevolent future queen. Garrick held a goblet of spiced wine, drinking heavily in a futile attempt to numb the yawning, hollow abyss in his chest. Down in the courtyard, the scheduled royal bard had fallen ill. The villagers of Oakhaven, knowing the magic of their quiet apothecary girl, gently pushed a heavily cloaked Seraphina toward the center of the square, urging her to offer a song for the solstice. Seraphina hesitated, pulling her woolen hood down to hide her face from the royal balcony high above. But as she looked at the weary, war-torn faces of her people, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath of the freezing air, and opened her mouth. She sang the Lament of the Silver Moon, an ancient Northumbrian ballad of lost love and endless night. Her voice was not merely sound, it was an ethereal, crystalline force that rippled through the frigid air. It possessed a haunting, flawless clarity that commanded absolute silence. The boisterous crowd instantly quieted, spellbound by the melody. The notes seemed to glow in the dark, weaving through the falling snow, wrapping around the hearts of everyone who listened. High on the balcony, Garrick froze. The wine goblet slipped from his scarred fingers, shattering against the stone floor. The moment the sound waves reached him, it felt as though a lightning bolt had struck his chest. The song bypassed his ears and resonated directly within his soul. His dormant, dying wolf suddenly violently roared to life, throwing itself against the cages of his mind. Because he was blind, Garrick's hearing was his primary connection to the world, and this voice was a revelation. Stripped of the bitter masking scents of wolfsbane and medicine, the absolute purity of Seraphina's essence rode upon the notes of her song. He could suddenly smell her true scent beneath the music, wild mountain honey, fresh snow, and sweet lilac. It was the most intoxicating, powerful scent he had ever encountered. The voice was not weak. It was ancient. It was regal. It held the power to command kings and calm wars. "Who is that?" Garrick choked out his hands, gripping the stone railing so hard his knuckles bled. "Who is singing?" Isolde Beaufort's face drained of color. She recognized the girl beneath the cloak. Panic seized the noblewoman. If the king discovered her deception, she would be executed for treason. "It is merely a drunken beggar. My king!" Isolde lied desperately, signaling wildly to her loyal guards. "Guards, arrest that woman for disturbing the royal peace. Throw her in the dungeons." Garrick's sharp ears caught the panic in Isolde's voice, the sudden shift in her heartbeat, and the clanking of armored guards rushing toward the courtyard. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in his mind with devastating clarity. Isolde had lied to him. The woman he rejected wasn't diseased or weak. She was a once-in-a-generation lichen healer, and she was his true, goddess-given mate. "Halt!" Garrick roared, a terrifying alpha command that shook the very foundations of the castle. The guards froze in their tracks, dropping to their knees under the crushing weight of his aura. Garrick turned his sightless eyes toward Isolde. His face twisted in a mask of feral, unbridled fury. "If a single hand touches her," he snarled his fangs, elongating in the moonlight, "I will rip the flesh from your bones." Blind rage is a terrifying force, but the fury of a blind Alpha King who has just discovered he destroyed his own soulmate is apocalyptic. Silence slammed down upon the courtyard of Castle Ethelgard, heavier than the falling snow. Garrick Wickliffe's command echoed off the ancient granite walls, carrying a primordial weight that forced every noble knight and commoner to their knees. Up on the royal balcony, the atmosphere turned instantly toxic. Lady Isolde Beaufort took a trembling step backward, her crown of winter jewels suddenly feeling like a heavy iron shackle against her skull. Garrick did not wait for his guards to clear a path. Guided purely by the intoxicating, flawless scent of wild mountain honey and fresh snow, he threw his heavy fur cloak aside and vaulted over the low stone railing of the balcony. He landed with a heavy earth-shattering thud in the courtyard below, his lichen physiology easily absorbing the drop. He rose to his full towering height, his sightless eyes fixed perfectly in the direction of the woman he had so cruelly discarded. The crowd parted violently, scrambling over themselves to clear a wide path for the furious king. "Seraphina," Garrick whispered. His voice was no longer the booming bark of a tyrant. It was fractured, laced with a desperate, agonizing vulnerability. The moment he spoke her name, his inner wolf clawed at his chest, howling in a chaotic mix of absolute joy and crushing guilt. The phantom pain that had tortured him for 6 months vanished, replaced by an overwhelming ache of longing. Seraphina stood her ground in the center of the snowy square. She did not kneel. The heavy woolen hood had fallen back from her head, revealing a face pale from the cold, but fiercely resolute. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But she remembered the humiliation of the lunar ascendancy. She remembered the taste of her own blood on the floor of the great hall. "You have no right to speak my name, King Garrick," Seraphina replied, her voice steady and clear, ringing out like a silver bell in the quiet courtyard. The court gasped. Treason was punishable by death, but Garrick only flinched, as if struck by a physical blow. "I was deceived," Garrick snarled, though the anger was not directed at her. He turned his head slightly, his highly trained ears picking up the frantic, erratic heartbeat of Isolde, who was now attempting to quietly slip away from the balcony. Guards seize Lady Isolde Beaufort. A dozen armored royal guards instantly surrounded the treacherous noblewoman, their halberds crossing to trap her against the stone wall. Isolde shrieked, dropping her mask of elegance. "Unhand me! I am to be your Queen, Garrick. You cannot listen to this peasant witch." "You masked her scent!" Garrick roared, pointing a scarred finger toward the balcony. His mind was connecting the historical parallels, remembering the old chronicles of King Edward the Fairster, who had once been deceived by a poisoned blade, much like the one that took Garrick's eyes. Isolde's deception was no different, a venom poured directly into his mind. "You told me she was diseased. You used my blindness, my reliance on you to sever my bond." Before Isolde could invent another lie, a new sinister voice cut through the frigid air. "Because a blind king without a true mate is a weak king easily toppled," sneered a voice from the shadow of the great portcullis. The heavy iron gates groaned as a massive army of rogue wolves and traitorous knights marched into the courtyard, their swords drawn and their eyes glowing with unnatural feral malice. At their helm rode Duke Henry Cavendish, his chest puffed out in a plate of heavy steel armor. Beside him stood Dr. Edwin Carmichael, the royal physician. Garrick's jaw clenched. The scent of the physician mingled with the stench of the rogues. The betrayal ran deeper than Isolde. "Dr. Carmichael," Garrick growled, his muscles bunching as his claws extended from his fingertips. "You were poisoning me." "Merely a steady dose of liquid nightshade, my king," the doctor said, smoothly, safely hidden behind a wall of Cavendish's elite guards. "Enough to keep your wolf depressed, your muscles weak and your mind clouded. Isolde was meant to marry you tonight, securing the crown. Tomorrow you were scheduled to die of a tragic winter fever, leaving her as the reigning Queen and Duke Cavendish as her Lord Protector. The political machinations were laid bare, echoing the brutal real-life usurpations found in the bloody histories of the House of Plantagenet. Duke Cavendish drew his broadsword, the steel singing a deadly note in the snowy night. "Kill the king," Cavendish ordered, "and slaughter the girl. She is the only thing that can heal him." Panic erupted in the courtyard. The unarmed villagers of Oakhaven screamed, scrambling for the safety of the outer walls. Garrick's loyal guards clashed with Cavendish's forces, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Garrick lunged forward, fighting with the savage desperation of a cornered beast. Despite his blindness, his hearing and instincts were lethal. He ripped through 3 rogue wolves in a matter of seconds, his bare hands snapping armor and bone alike. But the doctor's nightshade was still in his veins. The severed mate bond still left a gaping, bleeding hole in his aura. A heavy mace struck Garrick in the ribs, sending him crashing into the snow. He rolled, dodging a sword thrust, but his breath wheezed in his chest. His strength was fading fast. Cavendish stepped forward, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He raised his broadsword, aiming directly for the king's neck. "Your reign of darkness ends tonight, Garrick." "No!" Seraphina screamed. She did not run. She did not hide. Drawing upon the ancient dormant bloodline of her ancestors, Seraphina planted her feet in the blood-stained snow. She closed her eyes, reached into the very depths of her soul, and unleashed the full, unrestrained power of the aria of the moon. Music exploded from Seraphina, but it was not merely a song. It was a concussive shockwave of pure spiritual energy. The notes resonated with the ancient frequencies of the earth, vibrating through the cobblestones, the castle walls, and the very bones of everyone present. For Duke Henry Cavendish and his rogue army, the aria was an agonizing, deafening roar. The rogue wolves clamped their hands over their ears, dropping their weapons as blood trickled from their noses. The sheer purity of the magic attacked their corrupted spirits, bringing them to their knees in crippling pain. But for Garrick Wycliffe, the song was absolute salvation. The moment the high crystalline notes washed over him, the lingering traces of nightshade in his bloodstream instantly evaporated. The hollow, agonizing abyss in his chest where his mate bond had been severed suddenly filled with roaring, white-hot fire. His wolf, which had been starving and dying for 6 months, snapped its jaws and roared with the force of a hurricane. Garrick felt the power of his ancestors flooding his veins, but the most incredible transformation occurred within his mind. Because his physical eyes were scarred beyond repair, the aria of the moon offered him a different kind of sight. Seraphina's voice acted as an impeccable divine sonar. Every sound wave that bounced off the courtyard walls, the armor of the knights, and the falling snowflakes painted a flawless 3-dimensional map in his mind. The world was no longer dark. It was illuminated in brilliant, vibrating outlines of silver sound. He could see everything. Garrick shot up from the snow, moving with a terrifying, fluid grace that he hadn't possessed since the Battle of Redbridge. Cavendish, recovering from the initial shockwave of the song, swung his heavy broadsword in a lethal, sweeping arc. Garrick didn't just dodge it. He anticipated it perfectly. The sound of the blade cutting through the air drew a glowing silver line in his mind. He sidestepped the steel, grabbed Cavendish by the throat with an iron grip, and hoisted the massive Duke entirely off the ground. "You forgot one thing, Henry." Garrick snarled, his voice vibrating with the dual tones of his alpha wolf. "A winter-born king does not yield." With a brutal twist, Garrick shattered the Duke's windpipe, tossing his lifeless body into the snow. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining rogue wolves broke rank and fled in sheer terror, only to be cut down by Garrick's reinvigorated royal guards. Dr. Carmichael attempted to crawl away into the shadows, but a heavy iron boot came down on his spine. He was dragged away to the dungeons, screaming for mercy, destined to join Lady Isolde in the deepest, darkest cells of Castle Ethelgard. The battle was over. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackle of the torches and the soft, ragged breathing of the wounded. The silver illumination in Garrick's mind began to fade as Seraphina's song slowed to a gentle, exhausted halt. She collapsed to her knees in the snow, completely drained by the massive expenditure of magical energy. Garrick moved toward her immediately. He did not walk as a king. He walked as a broken man seeking redemption. He dropped to his knees before her in the slush and blood, ignoring the freezing cold soaking through his trousers. He reached out with trembling, blood-stained hands, stopping just an inch from her face, suddenly terrified to touch her without permission. Seraphina. He breathed the scent of wild honey and snow now washing over him like a warm blanket. I was a fool. I let my pride, my fear of my own blindness, dictate the fate of my soul. I listened to the poison of a viper instead of the truth of my own wolf. Seraphina looked at the fearsome Alpha King. The harsh, stoic lines of his face were gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered agony and profound regret. "You broke our bond, Garrick," she whispered, a tear slipping down her pale cheek. "You threw me away because I didn't look the part of a queen, because I smelled of the medicine I used to survive." "I know," Garrick said, his voice cracking. Slowly, deliberately, the Alpha King of the Winterborn bowed his head until his forehead touched the cold, snowy cobblestones at her feet. It was the ultimate gesture of submission, an act a Lycan king would not perform for any god or emperor. "I do not ask for your forgiveness. I only ask for the chance to spend the rest of my miserable life proving that you are the only light I will ever need in my darkness. Reject me, and I will accept it. But know that my soul belongs only to you." The entire courtyard held its breath. The guards, the villagers, and the lords who had survived the ambush watched in stunned reverence as the most feared warrior in the north laid his life at the feet of an apothecary's daughter. Seraphina looked down at him. She saw the scars, the trauma, and the crushing weight of a crown he had borne alone in the dark. She saw a man who had made a catastrophic error, but who was willing to humble himself completely to make it right. Gently she reached out. Her warm, soft fingers traced the jagged scar over his sightless eyes. Garrick shuddered violently at her touch, a desperate longing whimper escaping his throat. "A king must see the truth even without eyes," Seraphina said softly. "And a queen must know when to heal the wounds of the past." She leaned down and pressed her lips against his scarred forehead. The moment she did, a brilliant, blinding flash of spiritual energy erupted between them. The severed bond did not just heal. It forged itself anew, stronger, deeper, and completely unbreakable. Garrick wrapped his massive arms around her waist, burying his face in her cloak, as he finally wept the tears of a saved man freezing into diamonds on her dress. He had lost his sight to save his kingdom, but he had found his soulmate to save himself. From that night forward, Queen Seraphina ruled by his side. Her voice became the guiding light of the Winterborn, and the blind king who had once rejected his destiny became the greatest protector the North had ever known. Did the blind king's desperate fight for redemption capture your heart? The world of the Winterborn is full of intense drama, ancient magic, and unbreakable mate bonds. If you loved Seraphina's incredible power and Garrick's ultimate sacrifice, make sure to hit that like button. Share this epic romance with your fellow werewolf drama fans, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, heart-pounding stories every single week. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a tale.